I am entirely opposed to H.J. Res. 11 and the notion of placing term limits on members of Congress. I understand the frustration not only of members of Congress, but of our constituents. We are all tired of career politicians making promises every 2 years, then failing to deliver and blaming someone else or something else for that failure. This policy, however, is misguided, misidentifies the source of the problem, and provides the wrong remedy. The real threat to the rights and liberties of the American people isn't found in our ability to vote for our representatives, but in the exponential growth of the unelected, unmovable, and unaccountable federal bureaucracy that has exploded in size and power over the last several decades. These bureaucrats, who are nearly impossible to remove and are encouraged to become career officials through benefits like pensions, have been allowed to burrow into the undergrowth in D.C., yet have never been vetted, interviewed, or approved by the American people. In other words, they have never received a single vote, yet wield massive amounts of power. These officials make policies without being held accountable to any particular geographical or philosophical constituency, and are never held responsible if they do something which goes against the needs of the American people, which they routinely and intentionally do. Unlike members of this body, if we do something wrong or something which our constituents do not agree, we can be voted out of office. This is in and of itself a term limit of time served. The founders clearly established the primacy of the legislative authority through the long list of enumerated and implied powers granted to Congress as compared to the brevity of the powers granted to the executive branch in Article 2. The framers of the Constitution, when debating congressional qualifications, actually discussed term limits because of their inclusion in the Articles of Confederation. After such debate, however, they were dropped during the convention process. Today, bureaucrats often serve in the same agency for their entire professional career. These same officials gain subject matter expertise and institutional knowledge, all the while having been delegated more and more authority by this very body. As a freshman member, I am aware of how different D.C. is. Our body is unlike anything in the private sector. Getting to know the ins and outs of the federal bureaucracy, let alone getting a handle on the copious amounts of rules and regulations it pushes out, is even more difficult. Limiting a House member to 6 or 8 or 10 or even 12 years risks creating a body that is unprepared to legislate, let alone hold administrative officials accountable, something our constituents are expecting us to do. Such an approach will actually make our elected representatives less accountable, not more. Is Washington, D.C. broken? Absolutely. The odds are stacked against the American people in a government which has grown too big and too powerful to control and instead now controls us. But undermining and weakening the only branch of government that is directly elected by the American people is the wrong approach. As I mentioned, I understand the frustration that is at the heart of my colleague's proposed constitutional amendment. I'm willing to work with him and anyone who supports changing the way D.C. operates by working on legislation that properly identifies and targets the source of the problems we face and prescribes an actual remedy. This could come in the form of term limits for bureaucrats or other measures to ensure accountability and oversight over these unelected officials. I am working on legislation to term limit bureaucrats and would invite all of my colleagues to join me. Reform is necessary, and it should come from the people who are actually elected by the American people. The only directly elected officials in town should not become the target. It should be those who are unaccountable. I want to close by reiterating that term limits already exist through elections. The founders laid out what the qualifications are for running for office. But it is also imperative that members of Congress reclaim their rightful place of legislating, take such power back from the unelected bureaucrats, hold themselves accountable by taking difficult but important votes that would put this country back on track, rather than always blaming someone else, including the very bureaucrats and agencies that this body has empowered. This Congress needs to unify so that we can hold accountable those officials, federal employees and agencies who act in the best interests of themselves and special interests rather than in the best interests of the United States of America. I urge a no vote on H.J. Res. 11, and with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.